Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. North Carolinians will elect a new governor this week. It's a closely watched race, but some are paying more attention to a select few legislative races, ones that could determine the limits of the new executive's power. Republicans hold 60% of the seats in the General Assembly, allowing them to override vetoes by the governor if they vote all together. And in this election, Democrats are using a new strategy to try to break that supermajority by tying Republican lawmakers to the party's gubernatorial nominee. WRAL state government reporter Paul Specht has been keeping an eye on the legislative races, and he joins us now. Paul, welcome back.
Thanks for bringing me back.
Let's start with the breakdown of the General Assembly. Republicans have supermajorities in both chambers. What does that mean in practice?
That means that they can override any vetoes by the governor. And for the last 8 years, that's been Governor Roy Cooper. He can't run again. So now we have Mark Robinson on the Republican side as the gubernatorial candidate, and we have Attorney General Josh Stein as the Democratic candidate. Now, if Robinson wins, Republicans could pass whatever they want. He'd sign it, presumably.
Without a supermajority.
Right. But if Stein wins, whether or not Republicans hold a supermajority becomes really important for them because there are 170 seats at the legislature, 120 in the House, 50 in the Senate. And if they get 60% of the seats, they can pretty much push through whatever they want.
And that's if they vote together.
That's right? It, right. If they vote together and they all agree, which happens most of the time, I would say. There are some times it doesn't, but it makes the lawmaking practice for Republicans a lot easier.
And now you report that Democrats are trying to gain seats by tying legislative candidates to Republican gubernatorial nominee Mark Robinson. Why is that?
Right. We see this a lot in the federal election. People say, oh, so-and-so's a Nancy Pelosi Democrat, or so-and-so's an Obama Democrat, or so-and-so's a Trump Republican. People use these descriptors all the time. You don't typically see that in North Carolina. We didn't see that in the 2020 election with people accusing, Republican legislative candidates of being a, quote, Dan Forest Republican. He was the lieutenant governor then and the Republican gubernatorial candidate at the time. We didn't see that. We are seeing that now because Democrats say Robinson has especially low favorability ratings.
And why is that?
That's because he's made a number of controversial comments over the years that they've been able to elevate and put in ads, and frankly, that the media's picked up on over the years as he said them. He's said things about the LGBTQ community. I remember back in 2021, he was talking about running for governor, and we wrote a story where we quoted Republican strategist who said, you might not want to do that if you want to win, become governor someday. This will make it tougher. He said things about abortion. He said things about women. If you have a television and you live in North Carolina, you've probably seen an ad by now that shows Mark Robinson speaking into a camera and talking about abortion and suggesting that the pro-life move that people who want abortions couldn't keep their skirts down. That's everywhere. That's not just in the gubernatorial race. We're seeing that in other races too. The legislative candidates are using that in some of their ads. So it's a really unique situation that we have here, and it's because the Democratic strategists say, hey, associations with Robinson poll poorly in focus groups.
Robinson trails the Democratic nominee, Josh Stein, by double digits, according to the latest WRAL news poll. Are we seeing the strategy working down the ballot to these legislative races or other races?
Republicans say it's not. They have their own internal polling here. We're talking a lot about what each side says and their own internal polling. They say it's not. We even spoke to Senate Leader Phil Berger on the floor of the Senate last week and asked him about this. And he said, that's just not something we're seeing. We spoke to a strategist for the House Republicans who said, people are concerned about a lot of things in this election. But I believe his quote was something like, we are not seeing in significant numbers a voter who says, you know what, I'm going to vote Republican for Trump and elsewhere on the ballot. But if one legislator attended a fundraiser or hugged Mark Robinson, then I'm not voting for them anymore. He says that those voters don't exist in significant numbers.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear which candidates are being targeted and what they have to say about the attacks. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Paul Specht about the Republican supermajority in the North Carolina General Assembly. Paul, if Republicans keep the supermajority, they'd still be able to advance their agenda, as we discussed, no matter who wins the governor's race. What are their legislative priorities?
Well, we got to see them pretty quickly last year. So in the 2022 election, they did not get a supermajority. But then in early 2023, a Democrat, Tricia Cotham, decided to switch parties, and that gave them the numbers that they needed. And that made things happen real fast after that. There was a new law that tightened North Carolina's laws on abortion that used to be, you could get it up to the 20th week of pregnancy. They passed a new law that restricts it to the 12th week with some exceptions. They loosened rules for private school vouchers and are trying to expand that funding more. They passed what they call a parental rights bill that talks about information that parents are entitled to about their child and the pronouns they're using and other things that are happening in public schools. So those are the types of things they did once they did get this supermajority, and I imagine we could see more of the same if this happens again.
Let's look at these attacks from Democrats. What do they look like?
Well, one that's airing in our neck of the woods here in Raleigh is about Erin Perret. She is from Holly Springs. That's in Wake County, more moderate, more liberal area, but she's a Republican. They're running an ad that refers to her and Mark Robinson as peas in a pod, and it shows their faces on peas in a pod, right? And that's derived from the fact that Perret held fundraisers with Mark Robinson. She held one, I believe it was in 2021, and she referred to him, I believe in a social media post, as, quote, a great man. Well, that's coming back to haunt her now. We spoke to her and said, hey, do you agree with everything Mark Robinson says? And she says, of course not, of course not. But that's how these things are manifesting. There's another ad.
And that could be a big deal in a district such as hers, right?
Oh, yeah, of course, because hers is among a select few that are expected to actually be close. There was redistricting a couple of years ago where they redrew the legislative maps, and now there's only a few that are expected to be competitive. There are many that are, sort of baked in Republican, baked in Democrat. Perret and a handful of others are, considered swing districts.
All right, well, that's one close House district. Do you have anything in the Senate?
Yes. These ads are all over the place associating people with Mark Robinson. There's one against Lisa Barnes. She's running north of the Triangle. She's an incumbent Republican who has appeared with Mark Robinson, and they're running ads saying that she was an early supporter of his. That's true. That's true. She was. There's a photo of them together, I believe, back in 2018. She says, of course, that she doesn't agree with everything he says, and so she's distanced herself that way. And in some cases, the attacks don't land. There's a Senate seat closer to Raleigh in northern Wake County. It's an open seat that Democrats have held, but now there's two new candidates. They're running an ad against a new Republican saying, her name's Ashley Adams, that she's campaigned with Mark Robinson for tighter abortion restrictions. Well, guess what? Ashley Adams has barely ever been in the same room with Mark Robinson. We asked the Democratic Party and her Democratic opponent for proof that they'd campaigned together and that she supports his views on abortion. They gave us nothing. There's no photos of them together. So, in some cases, these Republican incumbents do have to go on the defensive and sort of explain how their positions are different from Robinson's. In other cases, there's not much there.
You mentioned what Republican insiders have to say about this, that they have their own data. What does Robinson have to say?
Robinson didn't get back to us with any comments on this story, but one thing he said on social media is that Republicans need to vote for the party up and down the ballot. This is about being on the same team and promoting the same values, and so he's talked about that a lot. Obviously, he's come under attack from his Democratic opponent, Josh Stein, as well as other third-party groups and things like that. He's trying to promote party unity, so that's what he's doing here. And I would expect he would say something like these attacks are unfair.
Now, is this attack strategy only focused on the legislative races, or are there other races where you're seeing this either up or down the ballot?
For the first time, I think in a long time, we have seen people try to tie Robinson, a down-ballot candidate, to Donald Trump, the party's presidential nominee. And after CNN wrote a story about comments that Robinson allegedly made on a pornographic website, comments that he says were not him, and he's sued for defamation since then. Democrats put out ads trying to link Trump and Robinson together. And that was, pretty easy because they'd appeared together a lot. They've campaigned together, shared stages together. But that's another thing that we had not seen here before, trying to drag down a presidential candidate with a uniquely local candidate. That's something that, insiders and political observers in North Carolina said they couldn't remember seeing before.
Now, all of this is moot if Robinson wins the election, right? Republicans can still advance their bills if they don't have a supermajority because he'll sign them as governor. Is there any chance of that actually happening, though?
Well, it would take everyone by surprise if it did happen because Robinson has been trailing in the polls for a while now. At least the last 2 months, there have been a number of polls that show him losing by double digits, which is unusual. Our state, people often say is a purple state. Things could go either way. It's 50-50. It's rare that we see someone trailing by 10 points, 14 points, 17 points. These are numbers we've seen about the gap between him and Stein. So it would be surprising, and that's a reason that the supermajority is so important, and we'll be watching it on election night.
Going to be a very interesting few days. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Paul Specht for his preview of key legislative races. And for all of our election coverage, go to the NC Capitol section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.